December 20, 1943. England. The cold bit through the leather jackets of the men standing on the frozen runway. Breath came out in clouds. Hands shook, but not from the cold. It was fear. The same fear that came before every mission, the kind that sat in your stomach and would not go away no matter how many times you told yourself it would be fine. Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown stood near his plane, looking up at the big bomber. She was called the Olde Pub, a B-17 flying fortress, 4 engines, 10 machine guns, built to take punishment and keep flying. Brown was 21 years old, from West Virginia, the kind of kid who grew up knowing what hard work looked like. His dad worked the coal mines, his mom kept the house running with almost nothing. Brown learned early that when things go bad, you do not quit, you keep going. This was his second mission as pilot, his second time leading a crew deep into Germany to drop bombs and hope you make it home. The first mission had been rough. Flak everywhere, fighters diving in, but they made it. Barely. Now they were going back. This time the target was worse. Bremen, a city in northern Germany, home to a factory that built German fighters, the same fighters that would be trying to kill them today. The briefing officer had pulled back the curtain that morning to show the map. A long red line stretched from England, across the ocean, deep into Germany. When the crew saw how far it went, someone groaned. Everyone knew what it meant. Long mission, heavy defenses, high chance of not coming home. Brown listened to every word. The route, the altitude, where the flak would be heaviest, where the German fighters would be waiting. He memorized it all. When you are the pilot, the crew depends on you to know everything, to stay calm, to make the right choice when everything is going wrong. After the briefing, Brown walked out to the flight line with his men. There were 10 of them. The co-pilot, the navigator, the bombardier, the flight engineer, the radio operator, the ball turret gunner, the 2 waist gunners, and the tail gunner. They were young. Most were teenagers or just out of their teens. None of them had been in combat more than a few weeks, but they trusted Brown. He was steady, quiet, did not waste words. That kind of man you follow into a storm. The ground crew was busy loading bombs into the belly of the plane. Big 500-pound bombs, 4 tons of high explosive that would soon be falling on German factories. The armament crews were checking the guns, loading ammunition belts. The crew chief walked around the plane one last time, looking for anything wrong. Oil leaks, loose panels, cracked propellers, everything had to be perfect. One small mistake at 25,000 feet and you were dead. Brown climbed up through the hatch in the belly of the bomber and made his way to the cockpit. The inside of a B-17 was cramped and cold. No heat, no comfort, just metal and wires and the smell of oil and sweat. He settled into the left seat and buckled in. His co-pilot climbed into the right seat. Together they started the engines. One by one, the 4 big radials coughed to life. The plane shook with power. The propellers spun into blurs. At the signal from the tower, the bombers began moving. One by one, they rolled down the taxiway and lined up on the runway. Brown pushed the throttles forward. The engines roared. The bomber picked up speed, faster and faster, until the tail lifted and then they were airborne, climbing into the gray December sky. It took almost an hour to form up. Dozens of bombers circling the field, finding their positions, tucking in close. The formation had to be tight. Tight meant the machine guns from all the planes could cover each other. Tight meant you had a chance. Alone, you were dead. Once everyone was in position, the formation turned east, out over the cold gray ocean, toward Germany, toward the flak and the fighters and everything that wanted to kill them. The flight took hours. The bombers droned along at 25,000 feet. Up there, the air was thin. The temperature was 60 degrees below zero. Even with heated suits, the cold crept in. Brown's fingers went numb on the controls. Ice formed on the inside of his oxygen mask. Behind him, the crew sat in silence, watching the sky, checking their guns, waiting. When they crossed into Germany, the flak started. At first it was far away, little black puffs in the sky, but the German gunners were good. They tracked the formation and adjusted. Soon the flak was all around them, shells bursting close enough to rock the plane, shrapnel rattling off the wings. The sky turned black with smoke. Brown flew straight and level. You could not dodge flak. You just had to fly through it and hope. The crew was silent now. No jokes, no chatter, just the sound of the engines and the distant thump of exploding shells. Then the first hit came. A shell burst right beneath the nose. The plexiglass shattered. Freezing wind roared into the cockpit. The bombardier screamed. Blood sprayed across the instruments. Shrapnel had torn into his face. The navigator grabbed him, tried to stop the bleeding. Brown kept flying. Another shell hit. This one took out the number 2 engine. The propeller windmilled for a second, then froze. Brown feathered it and trimmed the plane. They were still flying. Barely. "Bomb run," the bombardier called, his voice weak but steady. Brown held the plane straight. Ahead, the other bombers were dropping their bombs. Smoke rose from the target. Then it was their turn. Bombs away. The plane lurched as the bombs fell. Brown started to turn, following the formation home. That was when the fighters hit. German Focke-Wulf 190s came screaming down from above. Guns blazing, cannon shells tore into Ye Olde Pub. The number 4 engine exploded. Fire streamed from the wing. The top turret gunner fired back, his guns hammering. Shell casings rained down into the cockpit. A cannon shell smashed through the windscreen and exploded inside. Fragments tore into Brown's shoulder. He felt the sting, felt the blood, but kept his hands on the controls. The co-pilot was hit. The flight engineer was hit. The intercom was full of screams. More fighters came in, this time from the side. The waist gunners opened fire. Tracers streaked through the air. One of the German fighters peeled away, smoking, but more came. They kept coming, wave after wave. The tail gunner, Hugh Eckenrode, died in the first pass. A 20 shell hit him in the chest. He never had a chance. The ball turret gunner was wounded. One of the waist gunners was hit in the leg. Blood pooled on the floor. Brown tried to stay with the formation, but Ye Olde Pub was too damaged. She could not keep up. They started to fall behind. That was the worst thing that could happen. A lone bomber was an easy kill. The German fighters knew it. They circled, waiting for the right moment. Brown called to the crew. "How bad is it back there?" "Bad," someone said. "Real bad." The hydraulic system was shot. The oxygen system was leaking. Half the guns were jammed. The right wing had holes big enough to stick your head through. The tail was shredded. They were losing altitude. Fast. Brown made a decision. He dropped lower, trying to get under the German radar. Maybe if they stayed low, the fighters would leave them alone. Maybe they could make it to the coast. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. For a while, it seemed to work. The fighters broke off. Brown flew west, just above the treetops, nursing the 2 good engines, praying the plane would hold together. The crew worked to save the wounded. They stuffed jackets into holes to stop the wind. They tied tourniquets. They prayed. Then, out of nowhere, a German fighter appeared. A Messerschmitt 109. Dark grey with black crosses on the wings. It pulled up alongside them, close enough to see the pilot's face. Brown's heart sank. This was it. The end. The fighter would blow them out of the sky, and there was nothing they could do. Most of the guns were jammed. The ones that still worked had almost no ammunition left. They were defenseless. But the German did not fire. The pilot was Oberleutnant Franz Stigler. He was 27 years old, a veteran. He had flown in North Africa, Sicily, and over Germany. He had 27 kills. One more and he would earn the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest medal. All he had to do was shoot down this crippled American bomber. It would be easy. The bomber could not fight back. It could not run. It was helpless. Stigler moved in close, lining up his shot. But then he saw inside the bomber. Through the torn metal and broken glass, he saw the crew. He saw blood. He saw men trying to help each other. He saw faces pale with fear and pain. He saw a boy in the tail, slumped over his guns, not moving. Stigler had been a fighter pilot since the beginning of the war. He had seen a lot of death. He had killed a lot of men, but he had also been taught a code. His old commander, Gustav Rödel, had told him, "You fight with honor. You do not shoot men in parachutes. If I see you shoot at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself." To Stigler, this bomber was no different than a parachute. It was helpless. Shooting it would not be combat. It would be murder. He eased off the trigger and flew alongside the bomber. He looked across at the American pilot. Brown stared back, waiting for the burst of gunfire that would end everything. But it never came. Instead, Stigler made a decision that could have gotten him executed. He decided to help. He gestured to Brown, pointing down, then ahead. "Land," he was saying, "or turn towards Sweden. Get medical help." But Brown shook his head. He was not going to land in Germany. He was not going to give up. He was going home. Stigler understood. He pulled his fighter in close, flying just off the bomber's wing. By staying this close, he was protecting them. German anti-aircraft gunners would see his 109 and hold their fire, not wanting to hit one of their own fighters. For 10 miles, Stigler escorted the crippled bomber. He flew through German-controlled airspace, past flak batteries, past other German fighters, shielding the Americans with his presence. It was an act of mercy that made no sense in the logic of war. But Stigler did not care. He had made his choice. When they reached the coast, Stigler knew it was time to turn back. He pulled up alongside the bomber one last time. Brown looked over. For a moment, the two pilots locked eyes. Then Stigler did something no one expected. He raised his hand in a slow, formal salute, not the Nazi salute, a salute between pilots, between men who understood what it meant to fly, to fight, to face death. Brown, stunned, raised his hand and saluted back. Then Stigler banked away and disappeared into the clouds, heading back to Germany. Brown turned west, toward England, toward home. The crew did not understand what had just happened. "Why didn't he shoot?" someone asked. "I don't know," Brown said. "I don't know." They limped across the North Sea, the two good engines straining, fuel running low. Everyone expected the plane to fall out of the sky at any moment, but somehow she kept flying. When the English coast appeared through the mist, the crew let out a cheer. They were going to make it. Brown brought the bomber in low, lined up with the runway, and set her down hard. The landing gear held. The plane skidded to a stop. The engines coughed and died. For a moment, no one moved. Then the hatch opened and the crew started climbing out, some helped by others, blood-soaked and shaking but alive. Ground crews ran to the plane and stopped, staring. Ye Olde Pub looked like she had flown through hell. Holes everywhere, engines shot out, tail shredded, blood on the floor. One mechanic said later, "I don't know how that plane stayed in the air. It should have fallen apart." At the debriefing, Brown told the officers about the German pilot, the one who had spared them, the one who escorted them to safety. The officers listened, nodded, and told him not to talk about it. In war, stories like that could confuse people. The enemy was supposed to be evil. Mercy did not fit the story, so Brown kept quiet. For years, he told almost no one. The memory stayed with him, though, the face of the German pilot, the salute, the moment when an enemy became something else. On the other side, Stigler also kept quiet. He told no one what he had done. Letting an enemy bomber escape was treason. If anyone found out, he could be shot. So he flew his missions, survived the war, and tried to forget. Decades passed. Brown returned to America, built a life, had a family. Stigler emigrated to Canada, started over in a new country. Neither man forgot that day over Germany, but neither spoke of it. Then, in the 1980s, Brown decided to try to find the German pilot. He wrote letters. He contacted veteran groups. He searched for years. Finally, in 1990, he got a reply, a letter from Canada, from Franz Stigler. The two men met. What should have been awkward was not. They hugged like brothers. Stigler told Brown why he had not fired. Brown thanked him for his life. They became friends, close friends. For the rest of their lives, they stayed in touch, visited each other, told their story to anyone who would listen. They spoke at schools, at veteran gatherings, at museums. They wanted people to know that even in war, there can be moments of humanity, that mercy is stronger than hate, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not pull the trigger. Franz Stigler died in March 2008 at the age of 92. Charlie Brown died 8 months later in November 2008 at the age of 87. They were buried thousands of miles apart, but their story lived on. Today, their story is told in books, in documentaries, in classrooms. It is painted on museum walls. It is remembered by pilots and historians and anyone who believes that even in the darkest moments, there is room for grace. The salute between enemies over the skies of Germany was not just a gesture. It was a promise that war does not have to strip away everything human. That even when the world is burning, even when death is all around, there are still men who choose mercy over cruelty, life over death, honor over hatred. Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler were enemies for one day. They were brothers for the rest of their lives, and their story will be told as long as people remember that sometimes the most courageous act of all is to let your enemy go.